Hello dear students, how are you? In this video we are going to talk about respiration in aerial medium. We will cover worksheet 21 part B. By the end we will identify the type of respiration in earthworm, indicate skin characteristics making it the site of gaseous exchange, explain how gaseous exchange occurs in earthworm. Before we start, please bring your biology worksheet, your notebook and a pencil. We talked before about respiration in aerial medium and we discussed respiration in some terrestrial living things. We talked about respiration in humans and in insects. In humans, we said that the respiratory organs are the lungs, while in insects, the respiratory organ is the trachea. In humans, the type of respiration is pulmonary respiration, while the type of respiration in insects is tracheal respiration. Both of them, insects and the human, make respiratory movements during respiration. But what about earthworm? Let's find out. The earthworm does not possess neither lungs or trachea. It doesn't have lungs or trachea. And it doesn't do respiratory movements, although it respires. So here we have to ask, what about earthworms? How do they respire? Through which organ? In order to find out the answer, please watch the following videos.
In annelids like earthworm, oxygen and carbon dioxide are able to diffuse across cutaneous surface. This process of exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide across the skin is called cutaneous respiration. To facilitate cutaneous respiration, the skin of the earthworm is moist and slimy due to the secretion of mucus. During breathing, oxygen diffuses across the body surface and enters blood capillaries that lie just below the skin. Blood carries the oxygen to the body cells. There, in return, it picks up carbon dioxide and transports it to the skin capillaries from where it diffuses out of the body.
Now, after watching the video, let's answer the following questions. Where do earthworms live? In the video, where did we find the earthworm? Where do they live? They are found on the soil, so they live on land. From where does the earthworm take oxygen and release carbon dioxide? Through which medium or with which medium are the respiratory gases exchanged in case of earthworm? With air or with water? Respiratory gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, are exchanged with air since it lives on land. Now please answer number 3 in worksheet 21. Through which organ does the gases exchange occur? What did we see in the video? Which organ will allow the oxygen to enter the body of the earthworm? And through which organ is carbon dioxide released to the air? It is the skin. As we saw in the video, the skin is the organ where the gaseous exchange occurs. Now let's answer questions 4 and 5 in worksheet 21. What does this organ represent? So, the skin allows the gaseous exchange with the surrounding medium. So, what is it considered? What do we consider the skin in this case? The skin is considered a respiratory organ. So, the skin represents the respiratory organ in the earthworm. Give the name of the type of respiration in earthworm. Okay, so the skin is the respiratory organ. So what is the type of respiration? In which type of respiration we consider the skin the respiratory organ? It is the cutaneous respiration. As we said before, the skin is the respiratory organ in the cutaneous respiration. So the respiration or the type of respiration in earthworm is cutaneous respiration. Now please observe the figure, then answer question 2 in worksheet 21. Here is question 2. Give the name of the phenomenon shown in the figure below. Observe the figure, please. Here we have a cross-section of the skin of the earthworm. We can see clearly the blood capillaries under the skin. What is happening here? What can you see? Observe, please. The oxygen is passing from the air to the earthworm through the skin. Carbon dioxide is leaving the body of the earthworm through the skin. Here we have exchange of respiratory gases through the skin of the earthworm. What do we call this phenomenon? What is this process called? It is respiration. So this figure shows respiration in earthworm. But when the earthworm's skin is dried up, they will die. Why do you think this is happening? Let's figure it out. Now we are going to talk about objective 2, indicate skin characteristics, making it the site of gaseous exchange. Let's read this paragraph first. The earthworm has a transparent thin skin which is always humid, means wet. Humidity allows the dissolution or dissolving of oxygen gas to pass in the blood. So, in this paragraph, we are talking about the earthworm and the characteristics of the skin of the earthworm. So, it says that the skin is always humid, and this humidity allows the dissolving of oxygen, which means it allows the oxygen present in the earth to dissolve through the skin of the earthworm so it can pass to the blood. Referring to paragraph B, list the characteristics of the skin that make it a good surface for gaseous exchange. Now let's read the paragraph again and pick up the characteristics of the skin. Here, the earthworm has a transparent thin skin. Thin skin, this is the first characteristic. So, the skin of the earthworm is thin, which means it has a very thin layer of cells which allow gases to pass through, which is always humid or wet. It is humid. This is the second characteristic. Humidity, the importance of the humidity of the skin, allows the dissolution or dissolving of oxygen gas to pass in the blood. Here we have the third characteristic, which is the presence of blood vessels. So the skin is rich in blood vessels. So the three characteristics of the skin which allow gaseous exchange are thin skin wall, humid or wet skin, which is rich in blood vessels. Now please write the answer of question 1 in worksheet 21. After knowing the characteristics of the skin of the earthworm, let's answer the following question. Question number 1. Explain the death of the earthworm upon drying up its skin. Here it says that if we dry up the skin of the earthworm, it will die. Why do you think this will happen? Remember, one of the characteristics of the skin of the earthworm is humidity, or we can say the skin is wet. And this is an important characteristic since it allows the dissolution of oxygen gas so it can pass through the skin to the blood. If the skin is dry, then the dissolution of oxygen gas will stop, and as a result, the oxygen can't enter the body of the earthworm, and here the earthworm will die due to lack of oxygen. So we can say, since the humidity of the skin allows the dissolution of oxygen gas, so that oxygen can pass to the blood. So upon drying the skin, oxygen gas will not dissolve. If the skin is dry, the oxygen won't dissolve and it can't pass through the skin. Therefore, it will die without respiration. Thus, the earthworm will not respire and as a result, it will die. Now let's talk about objective 3. Explain how gaseous exchange occurs in earthworm. Using the adjacent figure, explain how gaseous exchange takes place at the level of the skin in the earthworm. Please observe the figure. What do you notice here? What is happening? Here you can see clearly the blood capillaries, and this is the skin. You can see that the air rich in oxygen is passing through the skin to the blood capillary, while carbon dioxide or air enriched with carbon dioxide is leaving the body or the skin of the earthworm from the blood and through the skin to air. So here we can say gaseous exchange in earthworms occurs at the level of the skin. As you see here, it is happening through the skin, by which the air rich in oxygen gas, this air, reaches the humid or wet skin of the earthworm. It is absorbed by the blood vessels to be distributed to all body organs. So the oxygen will dissolve in the wet skin and pass to the blood. Then it is transported to the other organs of the earthworm. While carbon dioxide gas is carried by the blood, as you see here, the carbon dioxide is carried by the blood vessels to be released outside its body through the humid skin, as you see here. Okay, carbon dioxide will pass through the skin to outside the body of the earthworm. Now let's answer the following question about respiration in aerial medium. Respiration in aerial medium is divided into two types. In the first case, we have direct exchange of respiratory gases, which means that the respiratory gases are exchanged directly between the respiratory organ and the other organs of the body. In the second case, we have transport of respiratory gases through blood, which means that the respiratory gases are transported between the respiratory organ and the other organs of the body through the blood. Let's see. In direct exchange of respiratory gases, in which type of respiration we have direct exchange of respiratory gases without the presence of blood? This happens in tracheal respiration. In which types of respiration we have the presence of blood which transport the respiratory gases? In pulmonary respiration and cutaneous respiration. What is the respiratory organ in each type? Let's see. What is the respiratory organ in tracheal respiration? In this case, the respiratory organ is the trachea. What about pulmonary respiration? What is the respiratory organ? It is the lungs. What is the respiratory organ in cutaneous respiration? The respiratory organ is the skin. Okay, let's give an example for each type. Which organism respire using tracheal respiration? Like grasshopper or insects. What about pulmonary respiration? Which organism respire using pulmonary respiration? We have many. One of them is a human. Which organism respire using cutaneous respiration, such as earthworm? Now let's answer the following questions about respiration and earthworm. Use the terms in the box below to complete the text. We have rich in oxygen, poor in oxygen, gaseous exchange, absorbed, released, humid. In earthworms, where respiration takes place at the level of the skin, a phenomenon which is cold occurs. What happens through the skin? Where the air gas reaches its skin. Which air reaches the skin? The one rich in oxygen, and it is by the blood vessels. What happens to the oxygen at the level of the skin? It is absorbed by the blood vessels to be distributed to all body parts, while the carbon dioxide gas is, what happens to carbon dioxide? It is released outside the body through the humid skin. Now choose the correct answer. Exchange of respiratory gases in earthworms is direct from the surrounding air to organs, or indirect transport of gases through the blood to the organs. What do you think? In case of earthworm, we have the presence of blood vessels or blood capillaries which absorb oxygen gas. So it is what? Indirect. It is transported, or the respiratory gases are transported through the blood. The characteristics that make the skin a good surface for gaseous exchange are Dry, thin skin and rich in blood vessels. Is that correct? Dry? Sure, it's not. B. Humid, thin skin and rich in blood vessels. These are correct. The skin is humid, thin, and rich in blood vessels. The third choice, humid, thick, and poor in blood vessels. It's not poor, it is rich in blood vessels. So the second choice is the correct one. As a summary of our lesson about earthworm or respiration in earthworm, the respiratory organ is the skin, and the type of respiration is cutaneous respiration. The skin is a good surface for gaseous exchange since it has thin wall, humid, and rich in blood vessel. In earthworm, we have indirect exchange of respiratory gases since the gases are transported through the blood and not directly with the organs. Earthworm do not make respiratory movement. Now please, as a homework, memorize the answers of numbers 3, 5, and 6 in worksheet 21 part B. Underline and memorize the earthworm has a transparent thin skin which is always humid or wet. Humidity allows the dissolution of oxygen gas to pass in the blood. Thank you for watching and good luck.